staying healthy, staying sexy, staying young is what living life is all about. And if you have doctors that have proven treatments that keep people young and healthy so they don't get sick, you want people to know about these treatments and that they exist.
This episode is brought to you by Gainswave. Gainswave is a treatment done at your doctor's office to optimize erection quality without the need of Viagra, Cialis. It's non-surgical, there's no needles, and it has an amazing success rate. To find a Gainswave provider, go to gainswave.com. That's GAINSWAVE.com. This is Mark L. White with Health Hacks, and today I'm here with Dr. Aimie out in California. How are you, Dr. Aimie?
Doing well. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing awesome, and it's really cool because I was looking at your bio, and what you do is you help people who have overcome a trauma.
Yep.
And you help them feeling good again.
Yes. And I would say they are trying to overcome a trauma, but may have gotten stuck in the process. And whatever that trauma is, that includes emotional trauma, physical trauma. I've certainly had my share of fractures, head concussions. And so I've had those physical traumas that I've had to come back from. And there's a certain process that needs to happen in order for us to be able to thrive again after any kind of trauma, just because of what it does to our nervous system.
So let's talk about what's going on today. Like right now, we're in the post-COVID world. There are people, they've lost their business. There are people that have lost loved ones, have gotten sick. How would you, like if you had to help them overcome their trauma, they're scared, they're anxious, what would you tell them?
The first thing that I would tell them is to learn how to become an expert at reading their nervous system, knowing when they are in that place of overwhelm, because that's a trauma place. And for many people, they are always in that place of overwhelm right now with everything going on. And we really want to be able to shift that into the parasympathetic nervous system state, which is where you are present, you are grounded, you can be stressed, right? So we still feel life, we still are feeling like the circumstances, but we're not going into that place of overwhelm to where it's either causing us to be so anxious all the time that we can't sleep, that we may be having the diarrhea and the runs, that our cortisol levels are super high. Or what can also happen is that we go into the shutdown and the collapse, and almost like this, I don't care anymore. Do whatever else you want to do to me, because I've already had so much, I can't take anymore. And that's another trauma place. That's the actual third state of our nervous system that a person can go into when they are in these trauma places. So just being able to know that and then have the tools to shift that would be really powerful for them right now.
Okay, but some people just don't have the awareness. They get into that state, they're freaking out, and it's like, okay, just calm down and breathe. But that seems so superficial.
Yes.
You don't need a doctor to say, calm down and breathe. My watch tells me to calm down and breathe when I'm stressed out. Like how, somebody who's just dealing with anxiety their whole life, as a doctor, how do you treat that?
Well, I start with teaching them how to shift their nervous system. And actually what we're looking for, Mark, is not to do breathing exercises. We're actually looking for the spontaneous deep breath. And that's how we know that their system is shifting. And I cannot stress how important it is to be in what we call the parasympathetic state. It's also been called the rest and digest, the social engagement system. All of those are the same words for the same thing. It's this state of your nervous system in which you are healthy and managing. And the problem with either the survival responses is that your whole body is having to compensate for that degree of fear and that degree of compensation. And so knowing how to shift out of that is I mean, you could say that it's simple, and they are fairly simple exercises, but they take some time, and they, as you say, they take the awareness, and that is not what our society usually has. Like, our society is not one in which we are even really aware of our body much. And we are all the time in our brain and our thoughts, trying to direct our lives with our thoughts and our logical brain. And the problem is that when we go into these trauma places and the survival responses, it actually overrides our logical brain. So there's not much benefit that we're going to get. We're not going to get much resource from the logical brain. So we really have to work directly with the nervous system. And it requires, again, it's simple, but it's hard to do just because it goes so much against the grain of what is normal in our society to do. It's normal to just rush to the next thing. And these exercises really require you to pause and then do an exercise, wait for the spontaneous deep breath, and then continually do that throughout the day as you notice yourself having shifted out of that healthy state and back into one of the survival states.
So when we say the parasympathetic, right?
Parasympathetic, yep. Mm-hmm.
Parasympathetic. We're talking about like that lizard brain that controls our nervous system, that is just responding to all the stimulus going out, thinking the worst is going to happen?
So you're thinking of the sympathetic state. So the way I think of it is there are 3 states, and a person wants to be in the middle. In the middle is where their whole biology is operating from a place of health. And there's ups and downs, right? So you can become stressed, but then you can bring it down. But you're in that what we call window of tolerance, where your biology is able to respond to whatever comes your way that day. You're thinking of the sympathetic response, where there's a danger and then there's that anxiety response. And we are literally just looking for that next danger, trying to understand where it's coming from, what it's going to be, what am I going to do about it? And it's almost like, you're in that state when you have the racing thoughts, when you've got that hamster on the wheel in your own head. That's the sympathetic state. It's a very high energy state, and so it's hard to maintain that for long periods of time, which is why people often go back and forth between that state. And then there's this freeze response, which is actually the exact opposite. And so if you have the middle window of tolerance, the sympathetic is above that because it's high energy. And once you consume all the energy or it becomes overwhelming, you dive bomb down the vagus nerve into the freeze response. And that's the collapse and just kind of the giving up, which is a way to survive, is just to not care anymore.
We become empathetic. We become, we don't care anymore. Apathetic,
Exactly.
sorry.
Apathetic, yes.
Apathetic.
And people describe it as just feeling emotionally flat, like emotionally numb. They go through their day kind of in a daze. And it's not, they feel like their mind might be somewhere else sometimes, like they're not fully present. And people can sense that, right? Like when you can sense when someone's like not really emotionally or mentally present. And that's when they are in their freeze state, because like they've just kind of, it's been too much. They've gotten overwhelmed and they've gone into that freeze state.
So I have friends, they all of a sudden their business is shut down. They have to lay off employees. They don't know what they're going to do. First step is to understand your own biology and say, okay, I'm now feeling these feelings. I have these racy thoughts. What do you recommend next? Because it's not going to bring back their business. Like, what's the exercise?
Yes, but Mark, what I would say is that they're not going to be able to make good decisions from that place of survival. And so even for that reason, I would stress how important it is for them to learn how to shift their nervous system back into that middle window of tolerance, so that then they're actually able to engage and bring their logical brain online and make good decisions. Because if the hamster's on the wheel, they're not going to be making good decisions. It's going to be very much just a knee-jerk survival, but it's not going to be, hey, this is actually what's best. This is actually coming from a good place, coming from a well thought out place. It's actually going to just be based all off of emotion. And so all the more important to learn how to shift your nervous system, especially in those moments where you need to be making major decisions. You need to be coming from that place of health where your logical brain can actually be online and not being overridden by the survival responses in the moment.
Are there simple tips somebody can do? Like, is there something simple?
Yes.
Okay, tell me about that.
Yeah. So one of my favorite techniques that I still use, and it's very simple, and so anybody can do this, when they start to feel that stress and overwhelm, what we do to work directly with the nervous system is actually just move our muscles in a certain way, because our nerves are what innervate our muscles. And so by moving our muscles, we engage and work directly with the nervous system. So if someone were to be feeling that stress, they want to shift their nervous system, they would turn their hands around and put them kind of near their, as close to their chest and their shoulders as possible. And then they just start pushing away, but really, really slowly, as if they're pushing a heavy, heavy rock away that's, moving it through mud, really slow. And then they can, the first time that they're doing that, I would say rest. And see, there's my spontaneous deep breath. Like, that's how quick that shift can happen when we work directly with the nervous system, rather than trying to use our brain to change our mood, to change our thoughts. Like, our brain is not going to be the most helpful resource in those moments. It's actually working directly with the nervous system and doing just a simple exercise of that, of like, hey, this is too much. Back off, give me space. And so I have people doing this exercise in their office, at home, whenever it is that they feel like, woo, like that was too much. Actually just push it away. And then it gives the message to the nervous system that, hey, we've done something in order to get ourselves protected and safe. And so we have this space.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself. I know that there's this whole movement with cognitive behavioral therapy and ACT therapy, and there's psychologists and there's self-help books.
Yep.
What do you do that's different from what they do?
Yes. What I do that's different, and again, this is inspired from my personal experience having adopted a son from the foster care system and having to learn firsthand what it takes to rewire significant trauma, and then having my own health crisis as a general surgery resident and realizing that my health issues were being at least contributed, or one of the major root causes was this imbalance in my nervous system from the previous emotional and physical traumas. And so what it takes is the ability of the nervous system to change itself and rewire. We call that neuroplasticity. And so it's this bringing in the neuroscience and the medicine to what has traditionally been just a psychological field of, hey, your mood, your brain, let's work with that. And so what I found is that when we work directly with the nervous system, with the body, mostly the body, the nerves, and then also be optimizing a person's biology, the medicine part of that, making sure that their nerve cells, their neurons, have an environment in which they are fully nourished, have all the nutrients that they need, then that's when the nervous system can actually make these shifts, when we work directly with the nervous system. The problem with many of the cognitive therapies and approaches is that it's working with the brain, but the survival system is underneath all of that and driving all of it. And so I have found that bottom-up approach is much more efficient. You're going to get results much faster if you can work directly with where the problem is, rather than another entity that is actually turned off when a person goes into those survival states.
No, it sounds easier when when I'm stressed out, I go for a run.
Sure.
and I'll go for a 30, 45-minute run, and my brain works better. I'm more relaxed. I can make better decisions. But I think it's interesting when you talk about children. You adopted a foster child at the age of 6. So I assume that's traumatic for him.
Yes.
How do you fix trauma in children when they can't articulate what that trauma is, or is the trauma even important?
That's a really awesome question, Mark. And it's going to be the same whether you're working with kids or adults, where trauma is something that is a felt experience in the body. It is a biological process that happens where a person, again, goes from the different survival states. And anytime a person has been so overwhelmed that they go into that freeze response, that's a trauma because it is going to have lasting effects on the nervous system. It's going to leave a footprint on the nervous system until it is processed. And again, our society just doesn't allow space and time to process things as we go through them. And so words are not important. And most of what I do with clients when I'm working with their nervous system, we're doing movements, we're doing physical things, we're not talking, right? And I can't tell you how many people, spend years in talk therapy, talking about the same thing, right? It may be a different situation, it may be something else, but it's the same pattern, it's the same thought pattern, it's the same mood pattern. Nothing is really able to shift as well until you work directly with the nervous system where these imbalances are. So the story is not as important. Words are not as important because it's an actual biological process that happens with your nervous system. It's very predictable, and that's what's cool about working with it is it becomes less confusing and less of this scary monster to work with because it's so predictable once you understand it. And then you don't have to understand it at first to even be able to work with it.
So how did you do that with your foster child? And was that the inspiration for you? It seems like that put you on a different path. And tell me about the results with your foster child. And I'd like to just hear a little bit about yourself as well and how you dealt with that, because that must have been stressful.
Very much so. So when I adopted my son, he actually came to me when he was 4, and I had no idea what I was doing, Mark. I thought I did, right? Like I thought that what he would need is love and stability. That's what everybody was telling me. And I thought that with time, love and stability, he would be fine. And that's not what happened. And that's what motivated me to learn about trauma. And then I found that this attachment stuff can be trauma as well. So I had to go learn that. And so it was 6 very long, challenging, stressful years before I actually found all the pieces that he needed for his shift. And it was a major shift, and everything that we had done up until then laid the footwork for that. But when we finally put that final piece in, his shift happened over 5 days, and it was amazing. He had gone from, just this back and forth between, I need you and I love you, but I hate you and I don't want to trust you. And it was this constant pull in his own body based on his life experiences of not having been able to trust anybody, especially adults. They hadn't been there for him. They had been the ones endangering him. And so then I come into the picture and I say, well, I'm different. And he's like, yeah, right. His mind, his nervous system had already determined like, hey, that's not safe. And he was not able to get past that because it was imprinted in his nervous system. And so again, we had to find ways to work directly with his nervous system. That's what I had to go learn. I didn't know that going into it. And so I did all the wrong therapies first. I went to the psychiatrist, who of course wanted to put him just on mood medications to just tone everything down. And I'm like, but that's not the real problem, right? And then I took him to play therapy that actually made him a lot worse because again, it's just bringing stuff up without bringing resolution to it. And so it would stir things up. He would have memories of in more clarity with more vivid details of those memories after his therapy sessions and would come home and just terrorize the home. So that's when, again, like I just kept going and kept finding what are all the different options out there. I tried every single one that I could in order to finally find what did work. And then when I had my own experience, it was the same process. It was like, okay, I did the conventional medicine thing. I mean, I'm a conventional medicine doctor, right? Like that's how I'm trained. So that's what I know to do. So I went and did that. No help. Like all of my labs were normal and all this stuff was, well, we can't really find anything wrong. And I'm like, well, something's really wrong, because there was a point there where I couldn't even get out of bed. Like the fatigue was that bad. So that's when I, again, just kind of started figuring things out on my own, trying a million different things, realizing that many things don't work, don't help, and finding a few things that was like, wow, like there is something to this. And it kept coming back to the same things that had worked with my son, which was the body work, the nervous system work, and then actually addressing, for me, a lot of it was my health issues and learning how to decrease the inflammation, how to optimize my mitochondria, because that was making such a big difference and keeping my nervous system stuck until I addressed those biological issues as well.
Do you think a lot of times there's like simple solutions to these things, but our medical industry, our medical system, where we always are looking to overcomplicate things? And I have 3 kids. My first kid couldn't focus in school. You take them to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and the first thing they want to do is put your kids on Adderall or Ritalin.
Yep.
Are we, why is that always like the default choice when there are easier solutions?
I don't understand that part of medicine, Mark. I wish I had an answer for you. That's been my frustration with medicine, and that's why I've become, a functional medicine provider and been trained in all these other areas, because for me, that's not a long-term solution. That's not addressing the root cause. And when we can address the root cause, everything else gets better, rather than just adding something on that may have side effects and cause negative imbalances somewhere else in the body.
Are there ways you test your patients? Are there certain things you look at chemically to see if there's an imbalance? Is that important? Is there, and then are there supplements people can use to balance that?
There are tests that I do, but I would like to start with just the big picture of everybody's different. And so it really does take an individualized, personalized approach to finding out how these trauma has affected their biology, or how their biology is keeping them stuck in the trauma patterns. And for some people, it may be gut issues, right? That's always a big one when it comes to trauma, just because of how many nerves we have in our gut. And it goes back and forth. For other people, it's been mold, it's been Lyme, it's been some of these chronic infections. For other people, they've already developed like an autoimmune type of process going on. And so it very much depends on their story, their history, as to what might be the areas of compromise for their nervous system. Saying that, yes, there are 3 most common biochemical imbalances that I see when I'm working with people, especially with any kind of early childhood stress, trauma, or that they relate to having an insecure attachment style. That's actually an attachment trauma, but they call it an insecure attachment style. There are 3 biochemical imbalances that I have found are most common in those people. And so that's something that I am testing quite frequently for people who come and work with me, whether kids or adults. And that would be like a copper and zinc imbalance, something called pyrrole disorder, which is just a genetic imbalance that pulls zinc and vitamin B6 out. The problem is zinc and vitamin B6 are essential nutrients for the nervous system. And so any kind of a deficiency in those is going to just keep the nervous system in a state of imbalance and stuck. You're not going to have that neuroplastic ability that we need when we're doing something that's therapy and wanting to shift that. And then methylation would be the other one. So anytime a person is an undermethylator or an overmethylator, that will also greatly affect the nervous system. And it deals a lot with the neurotransmitters or the brain chemicals. And so that's one of the other common biochemical imbalances that I'm seeing in people who are having a hard time thriving after trauma or seem to experience stress to a greater degree than other people.
So you fix all three of those. Now, the last one, methylating, like what does that mean?
Methylation is a methyl group, so it's just a carbon group that's put on our DNA that tells our enzymes how to read our DNA and what proteins to make from our DNA. So it very much determines which proteins are being made, which then determines everything else, right? All of the biological downstream effects from that. And so this is what we call epigenetics, where it's not the actual protein per se, it's not the actual chemical per se, but it's dictating which proteins are even being made. So if that's off, that has some pretty significant effects on our health and on our body. And so methylation issues have been found now in many autistic people, and it's becoming more common, at least more commonly found, more commonly looked for in things like fibromyalgia or some of these conditions where people experience more body aches, more pain. And so methylation is a big growing topic, and it is one of the common biochemical imbalances I see in those who both have had trauma, like experienced something as a trauma rather than just as a stress, and then are having a hard time getting to a place of thriving after trauma and feel like they're stuck in either the anxiety or the depression.
Do you find diet and poor diets, and obviously in the Western world, our diets aren't the best, but is diet the cause of a lot of these imbalances?
So these imbalances that I've mentioned are genetic. Diet plays a huge role when it comes to inflammation and the nervous system. And so that was one of the first places I had to start in my life, was thinking that I had a healthy diet and had to relearn all of that and what was actually healthy and needed for my body. So diet plays a huge role in a person's ability to even get through a period of stress, because you have to eat differently when you're stressed to support your nervous system. And then after stress and experiencing any trauma, we need to be able to support that. And the diet is one of the key essential parts of supporting that.
So if somebody's going through periods of trauma now and they're feeling anxious, what should they be eating? And are there certain foods they just need to stay away from?
So we know that stress makes the gut more permeable, so it's more prone to inflammation. And the foods that cause any type of irritation or are hard to digest are ones that they should avoid during a time of stress, because it will cause more inflammation. In addition, because the person is in a survival state, most of their energy is being shunted away from these other organs and systems and taken to their nervous system in order to handle and keep up with the stress. So we do need to be taking in calories, but we need to be taking them in a way that is easier to digest. And so smoothies, soups, things that are easier for the body to digest will actually be more helpful during a time of stress.
Okay. Is there a place like when you get somebody doing these exercises and you fix the root cause and you've diagnosed some of the genetics, is there a place for talk therapy, or are people now feeling so good that they feel like they have the tool set that they can deal with stress?
Most times what's happening is that, they feel so good and they know what to do when they start to shift out of that place of health, that they don't find talk therapy helpful. Now, what can be really helpful, and I really encourage them to do is to find a mentor, find a coach, because so many times in trauma, it was traumatic because we felt a lack of support, a lack of mentorship, a lack of guidance. We felt lost. We didn't know what we were doing. And that was part of why it was overwhelming. And so changing that dynamic now, and now we can get you back into the healthy state of your nervous system. And now we're going to bring in the support so that you have the mentorship, you have the guidance, you have those resources for you. So it's not necessarily talk therapy per se, but it's mentorship and guidance, and maybe that is a therapist.
You provide that for patients you work with in person, but you also provide that with patients all over the US. And how would somebody go about getting in touch with you, and what resources can you provide for them?
Sure. So right now I am a physician in California. And so when people want to work with me, they either need to come to California or live in California. And then I can work with them on the biology and medicine side of things to, again, just enhance the neuroplasticity of their nervous system. I do have a coaching program online. And so this is a self-paced programs that I've developed on, it's called Shift to Calm Aliveness, where they can learn these tools to shift their system into that parasympathetic state. And so they go through the exercises. I have live Q&As to support them through this process of just learning the tools that they do have available to them. We just haven't been taught this as a society for them to be able to start this work at home right now and start feeling the difference in their body and being able to intentionally shift their own nervous system to that place of calm aliveness.
People need that now more than ever. You see meditation going through the roof. So if our listeners are listening to this, they can go to your website. It's Dr. Aimie, and that's spelled AIMIE.com.
Yes, they can find me at draimie.com. From there, I have links to the Trauma Healing Accelerated programs. They can also go directly to the website, traumahealingaccelerated.com. Either one of those two websites will have links to the other, that whichever program is the right fit for them, they'll be able to find it.
We need this more than ever. I appreciate your time. I think what you're doing is amazing work. Everybody needs to know about this. So if you're listening to it, the links will be in the show notes. Dr. Aimie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Mark. It is very meaningful.
Thank you very much.